Hey fellow tennis nerds, I hope all is well in Malta. It's getting pretty cold by Malta standards. We're still in the Mediterranean. It's a sunny place overall, but indoors it is pretty freezing. We're living in stone houses with little isolation, and I don't want to have the AC on while I'm recording, so I am freezing a bit. Hence the beanie and lots of clothes. Anyway, today I wanted to review the Diadem Elevate version 3. Diadem is an American company. They've been around since 2015, and in the latest episode on the Tennis Nerd podcast, I talk with one of the founders, Evan Specht, a great guy, ex-pro player who co-founded the company with AJ Bartlett, another pro player, and yeah, they've done a good job. They've really tried to kind of get through the market. Very tough to break through in the tennis industry, as you know, with the big guns taking a lot of market share and having the budgets to sponsor players. So I like to highlight these smaller brands and their efforts and products. And I've reviewed the Elevate before, version 1, version 2. I've also reviewed the Nova, which is the power line, version 1 and version 2, if I remember correctly. And the Elevate version 3 does not have a huge shift in specs, kind of similar to what Head does. They have a good thing going. They don't want to change it too much. So if we look at the specs a bit quickly, it's 98 square inches, 305 grams, 7 points headlight unstrung, to standard length 64 RA 1620 pattern. So this is a bit different than many of the rackets on the market, which is either 1619 or 1820, and a 21.5 millimeter beam. This puts the Diadem Elevate in the land of Radical from Head, Wilson Blade, or a Technifiber TF40, or a Dunlop CX200. So this is kind of a modern control frame, not too heavy, offers room for customization, but can be played in stock form. And as I talked about with Evan on the podcast, this is perhaps a tad higher swing weight, but nothing noticeable, because they changed something with the grommet. But otherwise, the biggest change is Craybon, a material they added in the layup. It's a rubber material. Head used it for the graphene touch, if I'm not mistaken, and it creates, I think, an even softer feel. Not sure if it's the Craybon, but this racket feels very plush, very nice on impact, very dampened. You don't have any kind of bad vibrations going to your arm. Feels good also on off-center hits, so a very nice feeling racket. The only knock on that part would be that it's a bit dampened for players that don't like a dampened racket, similar to what goes on with the new V-Core rackets that I talked about, like great rackets, but it's a dampened feel, a bit muted, might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's supposed to help the arm comfort. So, and it does feel very plush on impact, this Diadem Elevate. But overall, you have to generate your own power. It does not give you huge power on any shot, really, although I felt like this generation is a tad more powerful, like not a huge lot, but a tad more powerful, perhaps thanks to the higher swing weight than the V2. But overall, it remains within that category of frame. You have to generate your own power. If you're less than an intermediate player, I think it will be too tough to use it. I would rather go for the Nova, which is also excellent. But if you are in the market for a control racket like the Blade, then you should consider this one. It's a bit softer, slightly different feel, does all things as good as the Radical, as the Blade, and the TF40. It's on par with these rackets. It's just about a preference, really. What kind of racket do you resonate the most with? What kind of feel? And I think Diadem has done a good job in like subtly improving this generation of rackets, and they seem to be doing well. At least that's what I got from my conversation with Evan, which you can listen to on the Tennis Nerd podcast. Quick commercial break thanks to our sponsor Facile Balls with their product, the Singles Playbook, which gives you patterns of play, strategies, how to beat different types of opponents, whether it's pushers, counter punchers, serve and volleyers. You have it all here. Each category of player also comes with a video that you can watch to better integrate these tips. It's a great product. I bought it way before they asked to sponsor this video, so I can really recommend it. Check it out. The link is in the description. Diadem have their own strings, but I like to test mainly with strings that I'm very familiar with to be able to compare. I tested this racket with Solinco Hyper G Soft, a string I like to use in control rackets. The Diadem strings are good as well, but I didn't have any lying around, so I went for this one, and it performed really well in the racket. I felt like these two was a good combination, but I'm sure you can put your favorite string and it won't make a huge difference. Some rackets are very string sensitive. I did not feel with any generation of the Elevates that they were string sensitive, so good to keep in mind. But just an overall very nice plush feeling frame, a little bit damp and muted, which many modern frames are today, but does most things well. You won't get any huge pop on any shot, so you need to be able to generate your own power. It's not a spin racket either. It's not like you're going to get a huge lift like an Aero or Extreme from head. This is not like giving you a huge launch angle. It kind of gives you what you put into it. So if you can generate your spin with your technique, it's not going to accelerate that spin, but it's going to output what you give into it. And that's the kind of frame I like. I've always been a fan of control frames. I might be able to play better tennis sometimes with power frames or spin frames, but in the long run, I feel more connected to these types of control frames. That's always been my feeling. And not sure where you are, but it's good to understand what kind of racket would suit you as a player. If you need help with that, there is a consultation service and a racket course on tennisnerd.net/help. Check it out. Let me know if you have any questions around that, but we try to help players every week find their racket and elevate their game. So there's not that much more to tell you. It's a subtle improvement. It feels a little bit more powerful. The feel is nicer for sure. I felt like that was stronger than the power category. The feeling is very good on these frames. A little bit muted, that would be the downside, but they can compete equally well as the Radicals, as the Blades, or the TF40, which are all great frames. The smaller brands can now compete with some decent options, making it even more difficult for consumers to choose. You can go on cosmetic, you can go on brand preference, and so on. The grip feels similar to a TK82 palette, I would say. Not quite rounded as a Wilson, but not super rectangular like a TF40, I would say, somewhere in between. Shouldn't be a problem. It's not something you think about even, unless you have a very specific grip preference. I think that's about it about the Diadem Elevate. If you're interested, check out their website. I'll put a link in the description. We want to thank Evan for joining the podcast, so I hope you listen to that one and subscribe to the podcast. Try to put out new episodes every week. And I hope you all have a nice day. And don't forget to play some tennis.